Hello, floppies and gentle. Alright. You are confused? Well, don't be. We are going to be doing a live Q&A with Grant Page and Penguin. So, just so you know, I will be focusing on his questions. So if y'all have questions, I may not get to them. If that makes sense. So, without that, let's bring him in. Pause the music. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Penguin is here. How are you doing, man?
I am okay.
Be too excited.
I hyperextended my right leg, so.
That'll do it. That is a good way to stay much less excited.
Yeah.
What was your question, Gentle? Why were you saying what?
Oh God.
Your question about what aquaculture is? Well, Penguin will 100% tell you what aquaculture.
That is your question.
All right. Well, I'm ready whenever you are.
Cool. Fancy. I don't know how long it's gonna be. I don't have like 1,000 questions or anything, so.
Perfectly.
Wait, why does Rogue miss me? What is happening in your Discord?
I don't know.
Anyway, so aquaculture is anything to deal with the raising, husbandry, stocking, and eventual harvest of fish, aquatic animals in general. All the way from bacteria, copepods, all the way up to large fish, arapaima, etc.
Out of here. Sorry about that. Yeah, Mrs. Ping decided to creep through a cracked doorway, and then I guess she completely forgot that she could sign up, or she could watch on her own phone.
Never.
So, all right. Any other questions for Penguin? Penguin, why don't you introduce yourself to the people not familiar?
I think most people here know me at least by name, but hi, I am Penguin. I'm an aquaculture student studying for eventual marine biology major, so that's what I'm doing. Right now I work at a research lab for either food fish or ornamentals, and I'm also doing some prey and invasive species studies. So that's kind of interesting.
Oh. All right. Does anybody in chat have questions for Penguin before we get started? Because, like I said, once we get started, I'm going to be focusing in on him and probably ignoring chat for the part. So, any questions to Penguin? Get them out of the way now, or you can hold them till the end. Just listen and learn. And apparently, Outcast hug. Okay. What about wifery as opposed
Oh my god. God damn it.
expected that one? All right, this is not what the questions I meant. The questions were supposed to be, about the talk today. I think they're good to go, Penguin.
I don't know. I'm not married. I can't answer the wifery one. Penguin would have to.
It's always wifer. There is no husband. They own
Everything that's mine is yours, and everything that's mine is mine.
exactly. Shouldn't you be in bed? Feed the dogs.
Wow.
Gonna come hit me. Actually, I know she won't come and hit me. She doesn't want to be on camera because she's already changed into her pajamas. So, safe.
Just put a robe on, throw something at him from the background.
Don't give her ideas. I thought about the throwing things. All right, let's get this thing going.
Okay, cool. So, my first question, as you're an aquatic ecologist, what is it that you actually do in general?
So that's actually a tricky question. Because I got my start as an aquatic ecologist for a government agency, more specifically a river authority. River authorities operate under a different code than most of your wildlife and natural resources districts. River authorities, at least in Texas, they're created much more to be regulatory authorities over the qualities of the water, more of a water quality. So really and truly, most of my work now is primarily watershed scale management practices, focusing on water quality. Now, good thing about that is water quality is a trickle down effect. Water quality, takes care of the fish, takes care of the invertebrates. So right now, what do I do? Well, most of what I do now is a lot of legislative work. I don't get to do as much research. A lot of my stuff is water quality monitoring, environmental investigations, things of that nature. I do not get to do as much research as I used to do, and I probably never again. So long story short, primarily my job is to do regulatory authority over water quality issues and to provide people management guidelines so that they can better protect the water quality and water quantity, which is an often overlooked factor for rivers, the natural. My mic cuts are real.
No, they're good for me. I don't know about the stream.
Yeah, let's try and do something. Oh yeah, filters. Gain. This way, affect more. I'm gonna unplug my mic real quick and plug it back in.
Yep.
Okay. Hopefully, that should fix it.
Seems the same to me, but I can't answer for them.
Yeah. I know what's going on. Hopefully the mic cuts are the only thing I can.
What the hell?
Okay. Hopefully that works. Maybe my fan was just putting enough downdraft that it was turning off my noise gate. So long story short, gentle floppies, since apparently it was cutting out too much. primarily what I do is regulation, exercising regulatory authority over illegal dumpings and environmental investigations to overall protect the water quality and quantity of my jurisdiction's natural river flows. I do not do as much research as so hopefully that is I'm not getting cutting in and out. There you go.
Cool. You said that you did research. What kind? Before.
So, most of my research was actually in college. When I finished my master's was over landscape geological processes on the evolutionary ecology of fish, specifically looking at fish in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, looking at them as a holistic approach instead of cutting it off by jurisdictional boundaries. Kind of did that anyway because I was looking at the 3 states, but looking at it for 3 states instead of just 1 state, which is normally what most research is going to do. That's was my big research project. So, and then I assisted numerous grad students on turtle projects, genetic projects. I did a genetic project on sunfish or Lepomis species in the Texas Panhandle, looking at hybridization factors. I did a age growth. I assisted with an age growth study of Lepomis, and it is annuli count of scales of Lepomis. Oh, let's see. We looked at microhabitat scaling of fish at a natural preserve down in South Texas. We've looked at tons of natural histories, going out particular properties all over the state of Texas, looking for fish, determining population history, that. And then when I got up into my career, well, I guess I should say, then I had an internship, which I was involved with Guadalupe bass restoration efforts, alligator gar research, both looking at trying to learn how to age and sex alligator gar, but looking at young of gar, which was probably one of the most fun I've done.
Did anything come from the aging and sexing of the gar?
The aging, yes, because we were actually going out to a reservoir and catching baby gar, which baby gar, kind of fresh out of their larval state, want to call it that, float around like tiny twigs on the water. So you actually, that's why it was kind of fun, because you're literally just standing on the boat with a net in front of you and just scooping up baby gar as you see them, and you develop an eye for them. The sexing, nothing has really come from the sexing of gar. Since there's no real outward morphological features to really sex, so it's really tricky. However, something from that study and other studies that I've looked at, the actual hybridization rate of gar in Texas is much more prevalent than I thought. Because Texas is one of the few places that you really have a chance to get all 4 species of gar in somewhat overlapping habitat.
Do you guys have any of the translucents? Or translucid, not translucent, sorry.
No, there was no genetic testing done, at least from what I was involved with. There is stuff being put in the works about that, but nothing that I was directly with, just stuff that I know.
Yeah, because here we have a couple of the translucid ones, and they're technically illegal, but they were given to the lab for research and conservation since they're so rare.
Right.
So, and one of them recently passed away because of age, and the thing was like 5 feet long. The
Yeah,
big ass car.
I mean, I get alligator gar, so 5 feet long. That's
Yeah, it's small.
gar.
He's like mid.
I
Yeah.
should make it very important to note that I do not have alligator gar in my jurisdiction. I've seen an alligator gar, however, I have worked with alligator gar, and 5 feet alligator gar is semi-average. I do have an alligator gar head that was a 105-pound female. The head is 16 inches. The snout is like 4 inches across, or like 3 inches across. This is a big, big head.
Hold on, I'm answering. I guess I can just say it. Gentle. It's important because they cut off borders based on normal ranges. So as things change, as river flows change naturally, different fish might get cut off and or gain access to something they didn't have before. So you do geographical studies based on state boundaries too, rather than just regional, to try and figure out if they were originally from there or if they were cut off or put there.
I'm
And it
actually
helps
go-
with invasive species.
I'm actually going to step in and say your answer is a proper answer that's politically correct. However, I'm going to completely disagree with you. Because what funds research projects? And that's
Fair.
primarily um, loans or grants from the natural department of resources in whatever state you're in. Well, those states, those natural departments, those natural resources departments only have jurisdiction at usually state boundaries. There are not really coalitions. There's not a Florida Georgia coalition of natural resources. So that's why they stop at borders. Texas Parks and Wildlife paying for a grant, paying for a college student to do research, they're not going to pay for that student to do research in Oklahoma and Tennessee, even though those riverine systems are technically linked. Not Tennessee, Louisiana. Those systems are linked, but that's outside of their jurisdiction. So quite frankly, it's not that they don't care, it's that they can't care. I understand what you mean. Nature doesn't care about borders, and there has been multiple works about trying to get people to collaborate more and more. However, when money talks, when you're talking about research projects, you're kind of limited to whatever your bounds are. So, yes, Penguin's answer is correct in that, we look at state boundaries, yada yada, but in my opinion, me being a little jaded, they're not going to pay for something out of their jurisdiction. It's like me. I'm not going. My jurisdiction is one. It's 2 upper watersheds, very very small watershed. So I'm not going. If I was being asked to fund a project, I'm not going to fund a project in, Houston, Texas, 7 hours away from me. Why would I do that? I'm not going to fund a project when it has no direct influence. What I do, what my research or my future powers. Jaded answer. I think
No,
it's
not jaded at all.
I think it's
It does make
important.
sense. It's a good distinction.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're exactly right. Nature doesn't stop at borders. But until you get multiple agencies agreeing on the same project, which has become much more popular, going to be rather limited.
Well, conservation has become more of a focus rather than just we just care about our own state.
Exactly. Well, it's not just conservation has been a focus. You look at the history of conservation efforts, and before it wasn't until like the late 60s that conservation really became even a science. Before it was, what was it before 1950, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was what was natural resources about. It was about making the biggest deer, the best bass, the biggest catfish, the biggest striped bass. It was all about game fish, especially in Texas, oyster pearl production, because that's where money is.
Just yeah, just like the Great Lakes area was yellow perch.
Exactly. Exactly. On top of all the other commercial fisheries. So before, it's not until recent that conservation even became really a thing. Because managing for deer is completely different than managing for rangeland, for I don't let's say like lesser prairie chickens. Managing for deer is completely different than managing for lesser prairie chicken. Um, incredibly endangered species. Managing for deer is completely different than managing for prairie dogs or black-footed ferrets over in Arizona, or the gopher tortoise, things like that. So,
Would you say it's harder for terrestrial animals versus aquatics, or vice versa?
in terms of conservation,
Yeah.
you it's 100% harder for aquatic species, in my opinion, for conservation efforts. Um, but there is a caveat to that, in that one of the best things for it is, Water Act. Protecting water quality has really helped a lot of aquatic species in the sort of short term. Um, we've always known about terrestrial species, but the simple fact is it's easy to be out there. You're on in the Great Plains in northern Texas, Panhandle of Texas. You're like, hey, last year I saw 30 lesser prairie chickens. This year I only see 20. Next year I see 15. Something's going on. Let me see it. Where, versus a river or a stream, it's an out of sight, out of mind sort of things. People are not slapped in the face with with fish being gone. Another thing about it is, one of the better things about terrestrial animals is they don't like where they are. They have the option, and I'm going to put this in quotation, option to move, go somewhere else. The poor fish that's in a very polluted stream cannot just decide, I'm going to go across and go to this other stream. So, but because of pollution criteria and pollution standards across the nation, clean water, not necessarily drinking water, but just clean water, has probably helped many aquatic species from getting into trouble in the first place.
Makes sense. Yeah, we have some. I mean, it's not technically U.S., but we have some Lake Victorian cichlids that are technically extinct in their natural environment because it no longer exists. And a bunch of the aquariums had some breeding populations, and we have to monitor exactly how many of them breed, how many we have on a monthly basis to try and bring them back, at least in captive populations, because we can't return them to the wild anymore.
Nope, they will die.
Well, that yeah, like it absolutely wrecked.
And
So,
I mean, the poor Victorian, that entire the Highland, Lake Tanganyika, and all that, kind of just got a feel for them. While I personally don't like African cichlids, they are relatively, especially Lake Tanganyika, those sorts of chain of lakes, right? Because they're very unique and very good model for evolutionary ecology. You know, when people are stalking tilapia and largemouth bass, those cichlids are literally
Toast.
toast.
Yeah, they're free food. It's horrible to say, but live bears don't usually do too well when you have an
Yeah,
apex predator in the same water.
no,
Because the parents might live, but the offspring are not gonna make it anywhere near.
no, and I mean their offspring's already at an incredibly low survival rate just because there's enough predatory cichlids in there that are eating on the larvae, so it's already a low survival rate, even for
Cichlids are pretty aggressive.
baby fish. Like even for baby fish, it's kind of staggering the survival rate of Africans and what they are. But it's
At least they're
honestly,
freshwater,
yeah, it's honestly a freaking survived as long.
especially giraffes, just because
Yes,
of how much they eat. They're
and
insane.
yeah, it's kind of crazy, Sorry to go off on a tangent, chat, but it's giraffe cichlids. Giraffe cichlids are an African cichlid that, quite frankly, that they're the fat American of fish. Like you literally cannot seem to feed them enough, and they will always eat. But unlike other fish that will eat themselves to death, giraffe cichlids just seem to just get fatter and still want to eat, never die from overfeeding. All other fish, you feed them too much, and there's so many fish species out there. You overfeed them just a tiny bit, and the next day they have bloat and they're on top of your giraffe cichlids. They always seem to be hungry. They're always going to eat, and I promise you, it seems like you cannot overfeed.
Yeah, you can't satiate feed them either because they just continue to eat the damn food.
Right. It's a crazy.
They never eat each other either. I've never figured it out. They
I
just
haven't
eat
even I've
anything
never
else.
even seen any sort of fin nipping, or even like I've never seen hunger. I've never seen that hunger aggression between them.
I've
Like,
seen them bully their smaller cohorts when it's breeding time, but that's it.
yeah, just breeding. Other than that, they seem to just completely ignore it. I did that. We could we could have an entire new Q&A on African sick.
It'd be a nightmare. Okay. Did you always want to work with the aquatics?
Actually, no. I never. I growing up. Um, I never really knew what I was. I always knew that I wanted to work inside. Love the outdoors. But originally, when I first started thinking about career paths, in fact, my original thesis was going to be a study on the diet of greater roadrunners, the area on the diet of on the diet of greater roadrunners in Texas on a particular location, and loved it. Went to my deal, thought kind of was leaning towards the bird thing, and my advisor told me, and this is very good for anyone thinking about going to graduate school, especially for a natural resources thing. He told me, Levi, you need to go home, think about what you really want to do, what you really enjoy, because if you choose a thesis project on something you don't love to do, you are going to be a miserable, and your chances of succeeding, finishing, are going to be very low. Because he said you're going to put so much time into it, you don't love what you're going to get so burnt out that it's going to be hard for you. And so I went home and thought about it, because this was right before summer break. And I was going home, and when I went home, not tell my parents, but me and two friends of mine, I would go home. We would go out fishing almost every night, staying out till, according to what I told my parents, midnight, 1 o'clock. Realistically, we were out there till 2 to 3, just fishing up in a storm on a little bitty fiberglass john boat that left fiberglass splinters in all of our legs. I would have to drive home and get up between 6:30 and 7 to climb onto a tractor, spend all day driving the tractor, and then basically try and work up enough, muster to go back out that night and go fishing. So what happened is when I went back home and I was fishing with my friend, we caught a fish, and I was like, oh, and we've been doing this for years. I was like, oh, this is a black bullhead, and I had known these were bullhead catfish for years, but at that time I actually knew it's a black bullhead. They're like, oh, it's a black bullhead. How do you know that, Levi? And I was like, oh, this is a black bullhead because the round tail fin, flat angel fin, chin barbels are darker than the belly. They're like, oh, that's really cool. And that's when I knew that I wanted to work with fish, what I thought. And then as I transitioned to it, something that's been very big in me, and one reason why I did not go straight research, is because I like real world applications. I like to live in the real world, and many scientific researchers, I don't want to say they don't live in the real world, but they live in a separate world. I grew up on a farm ranch. Have to work with the landowners, get really anything done. And while the research stuff was interesting and I enjoyed research, the more important thing to me was, what was the point of this research, and what can I take from these research projects to a piece of property, to a landowner, and say, hey, if we do this, it will help this, this, and this. And doing that was what I really wanted to do. And because of that, going away from direct research of fish, what I did was I actually wound up going into watershed management in ecology, looking at large landscape variables, looking at the evolutionary ecology, which kind of leads into, at what scale do you need to manage for fish species or fish health? So that's when I transitioned much more from research into, I want to do sort of management. I always thought I was going to work for the state agency for game and fish management in the state of Texas. I really did think I was going to do that. But I wasn't 100% comfortable with it, because what are the management side of the agency supposed to do? Well, they're tasked with managing for largemouth bass, for stripers, for channel cats, for bluefin. What we were talking about before, they're tasked with managing for these game species. And I didn't fit 100% comfortable with that, because that kind of gets away from looking at a holistic conservation approach. And then my job really worked out, because my advisor really instilled on me, there are some people out there that know quite a lot about everything. And my advisor was why we went to the same research sites year after year. He's like, instead of kind of knowing a lot about everything, I would know everything about one smaller location, which is why my jurisdiction being, only 2 upper watersheds, and it's actually very small. But because of that, I know all the land. I'm going to be working with the same land year after year, the same properties, the same riverine system. I'm trying to get some growth recapture studies, mark recapture studies looking at agent growth. That's really beneficial in the fact that while I don't have a very large scale, I get to know as much about as possible about what's going on in that small. So that's kind of how my transition has gone. And then finally, when I did get at my real work, I found out, as many people do, it's politics. And quite sadly, I'm having to play much more into the political field now. I can't just, tell people, hey, this is the best management. But now to get like any large scale changes done, you've got to play more into the political side. It's so much more about maintaining relationships, what I do, than just knowledge. Hopefully that answered.
It does.
Evening, Rex.
Basically, you were hoping that you could get a very narrow focused study, but politics got involved and prevented you from doing exactly that, so you've had to get around it in any way you can.
Nah, it wasn't that the politics got involved with my thesis. I was given very much free reign on my thesis to choose.
I don't mean your thesis, I mean what you're doing now. Like now you're into your
Right.
career field, politics has become more prevalent.
Yeah, and it's going to be. And I don't necessarily mind that because I don't like the political game because it's back talking and lawyers. It's just that's how it's going to have to be across the entire US with the way that current water rights laws are across the US. There's going to be a big, I don't know, come to Jesus meeting. I mean, quite frankly, it's water rights are the hot issue, and they have been for 25 years, and they're going to continue for 25 more years. Which is why aquaculture is so good.
It's one of the reasons.
That is one of the reasons. You look at the sheer amount of water usage, and it's hard. It's hard to find an argument that says beef or cattle production is better than catfish production in aquaculture facility. In fact, I kind of guarantee I cannot really physically come up with any sort of argument about that. Aquaculture, catfish, aquaculture facilities in the long run use much less water. However, there is a much more upfront cost of water. Don't get me wrong. An aquaculture facility, a new aquaculture facility, is going to pull 3 million gallons of water kind of immediately that they need on the front. But then after that, most aquaculture facilities, especially catfish production, you're looking at a 1% change a month of water in a completely enclosed system. Like I think you work in Penguin, you're looking at a 10% change a week.
Depends on the season. If it's summer, it's maybe a little higher. If it's winter, it's almost nothing.
Right,
It's
and
very negligible.
Yeah, you look at water usage to put a pound of catfish on the table. I think it's 0.6 of a gallon of water versus to put a ounce of beef on the table. I want to say it's over 70, maybe even over 100. So even just in sheer water, you're using literally 1% of the amount of water for 10 times meat and grow in 3D. You can't make a valid argument other than beef tastes better.
And it's sometimes cheaper.
sometimes. Well, that's also because of aspect of aquaculture versus beef production. Beef production has the largest lobbying groups besides oil production in the entire U.S., meaning that beef production gets a lot of government stipends. Basically, farmers and ranchers are paid to, they're assisted by the government for these. Um,
Yeah, it's really hard to go against the guy who calls out your local House of Rep when you're
yeah.
a bajillionaire beef guy and you sit him down in front of a nice 14-ounce steak.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Penguin, entertain them.
Oh God, they're doomed. Even if I danced for you, it'd be pointless. I'm not on camera. There you go. Got you. Dance. Throw your hands in the air.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Oh, good. Floppies wanted me to dance, and I threw my hands in the chat. That's it. That's all I got.
I hear playing my song.
Oh my God.
Yeah, throwback. Throwback right there. But no, you were exactly right, Penguin. You throw a beef lobbyist, and that 14-ounce steak, which, and don't get me wrong, fucking steak is. I'd rather have a steak than a normal old cat dinner. I love beef, and keep in mind that I grew up on a farm and ranch selling beef, which should give you or Chad or anyone listening to this, that should give it even more weight in the fact that someone who grew up cattle production and knowing the issues with it, you still can't make an argument that beef production is better than aquaculture production. Oh, well, that's a new one. The brine shrimp.
Artemia?
It wouldn't it be? It'd have to be Artemia.
It'd have
Right?
to be. Yeah. I wonder how that would even work. I mean, because you can put 50 pounds of Artemia in a can. Like,
Yeah, like my goodness.
how much Artemia were you selling? Like, good
And
lord.
how, like Artemia, how do you make Artemia productive? Like at a monetary value, like did about 80 pounds a day.
That's nothing.
Yeah,
I
that's
feel like that's nothing. I mean, we go through more than that just feeding our larval stages for our freshwater fish.
yeah, it's I'm trying to think
Oh,
of.
never mind. There you go. There's the answer.
Oh.
That makes way more sense.
Yeah, so you were basically in direct production line.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense on how that's actually
Yeah, basically they'd
monetarily
be like a
productive.
secondary supplement essentially, so that they didn't have to do it on site. They could just have it shipped in.
right, well, and also, just the fact that they're not have to worry about any sort of production. It's literally, go from here to there, probably, like an offsite. It's kind of like people raising vinegar eels in a jar underneath their counter. Um, which, by the way, I've done that many times. It's the same thing, just, at a much larger scale.
Yeah. God, that's
Welcome in,
incredible,
Christopher.
though.
Yeah.
Oh,
Florida.
hey, Florida.
Yep.
That
Penguin.
also makes sense. We got the weather for it.
Penguin is in Florida right now, Christopher.
80-degree water. Be pretty ideal for Artemia. Take no big deal to hatch them out. Grow them in a couple of days.
Yeah, you could. God, what would that? That'd probably be 72-hour turnaround time.
It's probably less than that because you'd basically get your adults from the previous day. They'd be laying eggs for the next day.
Oh yeah.
Once you got it going, it'd be no big deal. The problem would come in a crash and in between any of them. Yeah. Because if you had a
Got it.
crash right at harvest, you would be behind a week.
Yeah.
But if you had 8 tanks running, it wouldn't matter.
Well, and he had 16 tanks.
Holy shit.
All right.
That's a lot of our team.
That is a lot of our
Lord.
team. I never even thought of facility. I mean, looking back on it, it's kind of idiotic for me to assume that there is no tank production. Oh well.
80
Normal
feet
day
by
in Ida.
20 feet. Is that inches or feet?
You should be harvesting much more than 80 if you're doing.
Yeah. That should
Unless
maybe
you're just
800?
like being super conservative.
Because that's like an 8,000 gallon tank.
Yeah, just y- y-
Well, maybe 8,000 liters,
unless you're
depending on.
talking about 680.
14 inches deep. So that's about it's like,
Still be
that's a long tank.
that has to be custom.
Oh, yeah.
The only advantage is of that you get, that shallow makes it very easy.
I'm sure they made a ton of money. If they were partnered with SeaWorld and everyone else, they could just charge
Oh
whatever they
yeah,
wanted.
SeaWorld burns through money like nobody's business.
Well, there's a whole issue of lists I have with SeaWorld specifically, but
Most people do that.
I don't really want to
Understand.
get into it.
Yeah, we're not gonna get into the Shamu.
I don't even care about the whole, like, because I mean, okay, slight off topic, but like the orcas did die when that happened because when they couldn't swim with their best friends, they got depressed. That happened. What I hate is that they only front the big ticket, quote unquote, items like dolphins, orcas. Ocean conservation is more than just coral, dolphins, and the mammals. It's not just those.
All right, but now I'm gonna grill you. Sort of devil advocate. What sells? You're
Well, that's the problem.
you're exactly right. Like you talk about big ticket items, but the simple fact of the matter is that is your ticket. That's literally it. If it's not coral or marine mammals, they don't care. They don't give a shit about look down jacks. They don't give a
Oh, I know.
shit about, that used to. So like what sells? What's going to draw the crowd? Well,
Oh no, I understand it, but that's my issue with it is that they don't try and front anything else. There's nothing. They don't pull like like even Disney with Finding Nemo. They made a couple of digs, but then they also pulled a gigantic research grant on blue tang,
correct.
and It was
But-
Disney money. It was an open check.
But let me tell you something. Is blue tang what you want to be spending research dollars on? Possibly
No,
the
it was-
most widespread saltwater aquarium fish in the world, even before Finding Nemo, and it exploded by like 40% after Finding Nemo.
Well, I would, but the ocean harvesting of blue tang also increased to almost dangerous levels because of that. So there was no aquarium or research lab research being funded. It was all essentially ocean poaching. So,
You're right.
and yellow tang suffered from it too. A lot of the saltwater puffers did. The Acidontidae species did. All of the big head, little tail fish. All of those. Monkfish.
Yeah. Of course,
all of them.
monkfish, they suffered, but could you even classify as monkfish really being a problem? I mean, they're commercially harvested now.
Well, yeah. I don't mean specifically like they're just one of the ones that came to mind because it's all of those fish suffered because of that movie. Saltwater angels.
Yeah, saltwater
All of
angelfish have. I'm gonna say, while blue tangs did get a huge decimation, I'm gonna say that possibly saltwater angelfish, and I'm gonna go out on a limb in here. I'm not even going to go on a limb. In my opinion, the most impacted species from the blue tang harvest was clownfish. That's my opinion. You look at the like the Ocellaris clownfish, their population levels, and right when the blue tang harvest was happening, their populations absolutely crashed.
Yeah.
So I think that I think it was a bycatch, and I think it was the ocean poaching just be, hey, we're gonna grab these. Why not? Because quite frankly, clownfish, lionfish, pufferfish, all those fish are about the easiest things in the world to scoop with a net.
They can take all the lionfish they want.
Yeah,
Those things can burn in
don't
hell.
bring them to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, we've already got them.
Yeah, Christopher, just so to answer your question, Penguin is a student at a Florida university studying for aquaculture. I am an aquatic ecologist, trained aquatic ecologist in Texas, and we're doing. Penguin has a research project, and me and him have known each other. He's been involved with the stream for quite a long time. And I do YouTube videos on fish species and herp species, Fish Friday, Herp Monday, and encourage people to ask about fishing or fish in general, because fishing is one of my biggest passions. And Penguin, just to talk with Penguin, because he's doing a research project and he's wanting opinions other than going out and looking on Wikipedia and Google. Not that any college student ever use Wikipedia or Google.
It's a start. I go to their reference pages usually.
No, Wikipedia, honestly, is one of the best resources you can possibly find. It really is. They fixed so many of the issues, and so many people monitor it now for false information that it's kind of insane. And yeah, their reference sections are some of the best reference sections that you can find on the internet for the time invested. All right. But yeah, it's you can get into many more things about ocean decimation. That, I mean, it's like when I made chat watch End of the Line. When I made my stream watch End of the Line, which is far and above one of the best marine conservation films out there, in my opinion. Because it's
you don't think Deadliest Catch is real?
Hey. Hey, me and Mrs. Thing love us some Dead.
Yeah, but it's very, very dramatized.
Just a little bit.
It's
just a
pretty
little.
bad.
And we also watch it for the crab anyway. That's the one that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Christopher. I mean, that's common.
Yeah, it's the lionfish thing was. We haven't had any derbies because of the COVID virus this past year, so they've exploded again.
Um, yeah, it's I covered that. I did a Fish Friday video on the um lionfish, and it's just the what they've done because a lot of people don't realize that they see a lionfish and they think it's kind of like a porcupine. It's just there, and they don't realize that the lionfish is actually an apex coral predator.
Yep,
Um,
eat everything smaller than it.
exactly, and there's not much smaller than that. When people think of like apex predators, they're not going to think lionfish. They're thinking barracudas, barramundis, sharks and things like
Grouper
that. But
sharks. Yeah.
those are cruisers. Um, even your reef sharks, they're kind of cruising through, and they're hanging more out on the edges, especially on the cliff drop offs of the coral reef, whereas the lionfish is right in the middle. And a small reef shark is not going to go for in there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're exactly right, Christopher. You can find lionfish all at every level of coral. Basically, if there's coral, real or artificial, they can be there.
Well, and they can also live out in deeper water too, not
Yeah,
just in the coral. They can live outside of it.
I mean they're kind of just good. Now your red lionfish. I mean, the red lionfish is the most prevalent one. I think that's bred for as an invasive.
Yeah.
I think they're a little more tied to. Don't quote
Yeah.
me.
It's taken a while, but the Florida grouper, the seawater, or the salt bass and stuff like that, they're starting to come around to eating the lionfish because it's more like, oh, it just fits in my mouth and I'm going to swallow it anyway.
Yeah. Well,
The
and
problem is
also
lionfish will eat the same fry from those fish, so they're in
right.
a constant back and forth.
It's a constant battle. When you have two apex predators fighting, it goes into that entire niche overlap theory. You cannot have two animals occupying the same niche. Well, quite frankly, groupers and lionfish occupy the same niche.
Yeah, but
Really
groupers
do.
take longer to get there, and
Right.
lionfish don't.
Exactly. So, one will eventually out the other. It's not a good thing, and that's why there's all these programs. One of the most popular program around the world for lionfish, especially lionfish control, is to tell people, "Hey, go spear them and then cook them." Apparently,
Hmm.
they're very easy to cook. They're clean. And apparently they're pretty darn tasty. I don't know. I live quite far away from ocean or the marine. I definitely specialize in the freshwater side. And by much more specialized meaning I don't like I don't like spending time on the beach. I think the beach, especially Texas Gulf Coast. All right. But yes, gentle, highly encourage go buy or rent Into the Line. If you have Amazon Prime, you can rent it for like $4.99. If you can buy it for $7.99, it's incredible. I watch it about once every other month. Any more questions?
Yeah, so you're an ecologist for aquatics. Do you have any of the fisheries versus aquaculture competition thing there?
Um, not directly where I am. I have one reservoir in my jurisdiction, and right downstream of that reservoir there is a smaller reservoir. I will call you after this, all right, Holiday? I'm pretty angry at both you and Mrs. P. Okay. By the way, they don't know. Keep it a secret. But no, so there is one property downstream in that secondary reservoir chain that has a fish farming permit. So basically, so kind of they have the water right to build that fish farm. I don't believe it's active right now. But it's not really there now. However, there is a lot of aquaculture facilities throughout the state of Texas that are working at. A lot of times they're working on your probably most popular aquaculture facilities. You kind of have two. You have catfish production for food, and then you have sort of stocking production, which is probably your second most popular in Texas. In that, so they're raising up fathead minnows, golden shiners, small sunfish to stock tanks for food for largemouth bass and channel cat, blue cat, and wrong, but they're doing that. And then when you get on the coast, you finally have the best example, I think, in the United States about polycultures. I think are the future of. They're not perch. All right. Oh my God, he knows. By the way, Doc Holiday 02, my absolute best friend in the world, best man at hunting, knows exactly how to push my button. So we just want to flip him off and throw him. He's just mad because he didn't grow in high school. No, but seriously, when you get into the Gulf Coast, you have one of the best examples of polyculture systems in the United States. That is because when you get into the coast, you finally have one of the biggest crops along the Texas Gulf Coast is actually rice. And down there, they actually go into a polyculture system to grow crawfish in rice.
Yep.
Make no mistakes that crawfish aquaculture project. So what they do is they have those crawfish eating that dead plant material from the rice, keeping that rice healthy because they're going to go after the healthy rice plants absolutely last. They're going to be eating decaying plant material first. And rice has to be flooded. So it's a win-win. The only disadvantage in, and one of the biggest things about crawfish is you kind of have to pay more attention and less attention to your water quality, your quantity, and things like that. Because if something goes wrong, a lot of those crawfish facilities, they have metal flashing all surrounding those fields. Because if crawfish don't like where they are, they just say, all right, this place sucks. I'm going to go over to that pond. And so, but it's one of the best examples because most of your other facilities are not doing polyculture systems. Some of them try and do it by, moving your effluent over lettuce leaves, which is kind of good, but it's not actually a true polyculture system. It's basically just moving
fertilizer.
Yeah, it's just fertilizer. And there isn't examples of numerous ones, not in Texas, but where they sell their green water, so their wastewater, to neighboring farms and ranches for fertilizer. So they basically give their effluent to the surrounding farm ranches to allow them to fertilize that. So that's been relative. But in terms of the actual polyculture system, I mean, nothing is going to compete with the polycultural systems in rural China. It's just not. You can't get it. It's just impossible. I mean, you got 7 things being produced in one body of water.
There's a couple of studies, not at our lab, but in the US, where they're doing ecosystem studies, where they're essentially making a smaller ecosystem and they're harvesting some from each side so it stays in a balance.
Yeah.
And I think those studies are incredible.
they're insane, those studies. But I mean, you get to, going back to the polyculture, it's that, but at a much smaller scale. You're talking
Yeah.
about one small hillside, and you're growing rice, you're growing pigs, you're growing silkworms, you're growing fruits, you're growing two different kind of carp. So you're growing 7 things in one pond. Not like crop rotation, gentle, because they're all doing it at the same time. You plant the rice, you flood the rice, you let the pigs eat the dead rice material, and their feces are fertilizing the rice. You have carp that are also eating the dead plant material, and then you have carp on the bottom eating the fecal matter, the leftover fecal matter that is fertilization. But when those carp die, or you harvest them, you feed them to the pigs. So you're feeding the pig part of the carp crop, and then you have mulberry trees next to that pond, and the mulberry trees, mulberries are an incredible fruit. So they're harvesting the fruit. However, they're also letting silkworms spin their silk cocoons in the mulberry trees so they can harvest the silk from the mulberry tree as well. So they're harvesting silk, mulberry fruit, and you have 2 kinds of carp keeping your sort of pond clean and your rice growing down there. And then you're eating the carp and feeding the leftover carp to the pigs and then slaughtering the pigs. Pigs are helping fertilize the rice. It's kind of like Penguin said, they're looking at ecosystem studies that are looking at exactly things like that. And it's almost a 2 steps forward to look 300 steps back. Quite frankly, as many problems as China has in the aquatic world, and do not get me wrong, there is tons of things China has done terribly. We can talk about the Yangtze River all day. But their rural side of China has had sustenance aquaculture and agriculture for years, which in a capitalist world, gentle, really can't make sustenance farming viable because everything costs money. Now, people are trying to get back into sustenance, farmers markets, and things like that. The issue is just the cost. And here's something that's really important to remember. This is something my advisor said that I have taken to heart. People worry about the environment on a full stomach. That's the simple truth. So anytime something happens that puts America in the slightest bit of stress, people don't care about the environment. And when you get to these rural communities, where the rural communities are going to be where your people that want to do sustenance farming, however, they're usually your communities that are going to be the most cash strapped. And so they're worrying about that. So why should they go buy their neighbor's cucumber for $7? That's a very big exaggeration. Why should they go buy this cucumber for $5 when next time they can go to the grocery store and buy it for $9? But you tell them, well, this is more naturally grown and yada yada, and they're like, but 99 cents plus $3 in my pocket. So it's a catch-22. And the thing is about it, gentle, and what we were talking about earlier, aquaculture does not get love. And in fact, most aquaculture facilities do not get any government subsidies. That's increasing more and more because politicians are driven by lobbyists. Politicians are going to do what people paid into office. And the 2 strongest lobbying groups out there in America is oil and beef. That's the simple truth, especially in Texas. So you're going to trying to get politicians to do that. Like, you have to basically put your money where your mouth is, sort of thing. And that's really hard to do. And not only that, you shouldn't want to completely destroy the beef. Shouldn't. Because think going back to what I do, working with landowners, I work with cattle ranch, and I don't want that. I grew up a cattle ranch, and quite frankly, your farmers and ranchers are the ones who care the most about the land, than you can imagine. Like, they're the ones who
they'll kill each other for it.
But
in some cases,
they are going to be, because you have to think about what is all conservation money comes from. Conservation money in America comes from the Pittman-Robertson Act and the Lincoln-Douglas Act type, yada yada. But every time you buy a firearm, anytime you buy ammo, anytime you anytime you buy fishing gear, a fishing pole, lures, a fishing license, yada yada, a portion of that money, there's an extra tax that people don't realize on top of those things, and that money goes into a federal pot. If it's firearms or lures or anything like that, hunting licenses stay where their section is, holiday. So like Texas hunting license, that money stays in Texas. However, ammunition goes to a federal pot of money that gets distributed among the states for conservation projects and easements and just conservation works, and it's distributed by how much that state has put into the pot. So New York gets a very small portion of the pot because there's not a lot of ammunition sold there, versus Texas. Texas, everyone has a gun, everyone buys ammo, and we're not going to get into a gun control debate on this because that's not what it's about. However, because of that and the simple fact that hunting is much more ingrained into Texas people in general, Southern people in general, that's a much more of a tradition. Texas gets an insanely large portion of that. Exactly, like Christopher said, you can't dislike hunters and you can't dislike agricultural production. You want those people on your side. Aquaculture and agriculture are going to be constantly at odds, just because they are. However, there's many things that they could do to work things out together, in better way.
Yeah, the only fish that have that kind of money right now that are considered commodities is catfish and I believe trout. And I think,
Yes.
is it salmon that used to be but has fallen out, and now it's kind of tilapia a little bit, but not really?
Well, tilapia 100% is. The issue with tilapia is basically people have gotten so wise about how invasive they are that they don't want to bring those out. Tilapias are a huge issue in Texas. So now it is illegal for you to transport tilapia without a permit or stock it without a permit. And you have to basically show that you're putting it in a pond that has no chances of going over to an adjacent water body. So tilapia, that trout and salmon, trout still are, because there's the tradition. It was catfish and then trout. The difference is catfish, once we figured out how to raise catfish, by God, there's nothing easier in the world to raise than catfish. Except for tilapia.
Food.
Except for tilapia. Tilapia are literally the only thing in the world that are easier to grow than catfish. The biggest issue that we had with catfish was when aquaculture first got it started, we couldn't figure out how to make catfish breed because we didn't know how they made their cavity nests. And just a little history, I believe this. Now, this could be a tall tale, whatever. But I believe what happened is they threw out one of the old milk jugs, which used to come in the big metal containers. That's how milk used to come to like blocks and everything. They threw out one of those milk jugs, and the next season they had 10 million babies. They're like, oh, well, we'll just give them fake cavities, and it's history. So yeah, trout, there's the tradition, because trout were always much more of a um, seek and thrill fish. The history of um, tilapia. The reason why they have a purpose, gentle, is because it's so cheap to raise them that that's it. It's cheap to raise them. It's very cheap food.
They're a cichlid.
Yeah, they'll eat anything. Over
It's the
in
health.
the
Some of them
east,
can
yeah,
filter feed.
over in the Eastern Asian countries, um, oh, you sure tilapia? You meant in nature? They're just a cichlid. They're kind of like a small. I don't want to even say they're like a bass. They're just a mid-level predator in their riverine system. Yeah. Well, that's very common across because trout are relatively easy to raise. Texas has a trout stocking program called the Neighborhood Fishing Program, where they stock trout in bodies of water, expecting them to die. Most of the time, they survive for the winter system and then they die, except for one riverine system. They survive in the tail race of the dam. They can't go downstream anymore, and there's a dam upstream. So it's kind of interesting. You can go catch trout there year round in Central Texas. But the idea behind that program is to get people out and fishing, because as hunting license revenue and fishing license revenue goes down, Texas Parks and Wildlife has less money to work with. Fishing license declines have happened, and this is nationally. Fishing licenses go down at a much slower rate than hunting license, because you always have the dad taking his kids out fishing, or the grandparents trying to take their grandkids fishing. So there's a more of a tradition passing on the fishing skills to future generations. Hunting, unfortunately, has gone back to much more of a, let's say, rich man's sport. I don't like to say that, but it kind of is. Unless, most people cannot afford to go hunting, and most people don't have access to hunting. The access to hunting is drastically decreased across the nation, specifically in Texas. And that goes into the fact that because of the urbanization of America, um, urbanization is urban sprawl is really taken apart. And the simple fact that it's incredibly difficult for these mom and pop farms and ranches to survive anymore. Basically, you need so much land that it's really hard to make a profit on ranching. Well, yes, Christopher, I live in one of the most dense deer populations in the country. It's insane. But
Yeah, we
it's
have a
hard
wild boar
to
problem.
yes. It's hard to get people to allow other people on their property for free. So, all right, while you get your next question ready, Penguin, I'm going to go grab me some.
Okie dokie. Yeah, Florida's got the same kind of issue with deer, but specifically with wild boar, because they were on the list for a while, and now they're not. Now they're a plague. It's not even just central anymore, though. It's like northern too. It's kind of a nightmare.
Good to go?
Yep.
All right.
So you mainly deal with the water quality aspect, but have you seen any species either increase or decreases in your specific rivers?
Um, so one of my large programs is invasive species. Um, so our probably biggest concern right now is Rondo basin, which that's causing a decline. Um, just fish in general, the number. However, Guadalupe bass are taking a big hit in our riverine systems because, um, I mean, quite frankly, the riverine systems that I am a part of are very, um, I don't want to say they're ephemeral, but they almost are. It's very flashy. So, we're going through periodic droughts and then super floods, drought, super flood, which is plays real havoc on your sort of upper echelon riverine predators, which Guadalupe bass are. They're the riverine version of a largemouth bass, which largemouth bass can live. But gar, things like that, they have a much more difficult time surviving during these drought. So right now, I'm seeing the biggest decrease in Guadalupe bass numbers and gar numbers. I'm seeing a significant increase in western mosquito fish because we're creating much more slack water streams since we're no longer flowing. And anyone who ever dealt with western mosquito fish can tell you if the water ain't flowing, mosquito fish just breed all the time.
Fucking gouramis.
Is insect population a big effect? It depends on, yes, gambusia. It depends on what you mean by effect on insect population. Insect populations, aquatic invertebrates are an incredibly good indicator on overall river health. If you know how to identify them. So, if your aquatic invertebrate population is bad, chances are you're headed to a crash of your fish population. If your fish population is good, your insect population is good, but your fish population is a little under what you would expect, there's usually much more individual factors. However, aquatic invertebrates are going to be some of the first things to die if a pollution effect happens. And that's one thing that, have to be concerned about through nobody's fault at all. These things, accidents do happen. A septic system ruptures and that causes an extreme nutrient implosion into the riverine system, which causes a massive explosion of nutrients, algae, and insects. Well, that explosion is not sustainable, so it crashes. And your insect population is going to be the first one to do both of those, explode and crash. Yes.
You have any winter versus summer trends?
Not really. Since we are so south, latitudinally, our winter trends are much more of a sort of just small dormancy periods. And it's normally, just them going into just sort of dormancy, hiding in the crevices and things. We don't really have trends because in all, our winters, technically our winters, but realistically in terms of weather-wise and water temperature-wise, we're only looking at month and a half on average. So winter versus summer trends, normally in terms of fish, there's very little. In terms of water quality, there's a huge swing. And in summer, you're going to have a much more higher level of nutrient explosions and nutrient blooms because of increased usage of the water, not just by people, but by wildlife, things like that. And with that very warm water, causing everything to just chemically react faster, including your nitrates and things like that, you're going to have much more issues in terms of that. Not only that, summer is when you normally are going to be having your yearly drawdown period. Winter, you have a yearly drawdown period as well, but usually it's not to the same extent. You usually don't have the nutrient issue with water in winter times because the water's cold enough that you're not having a lot of organic processes happen quickly like you do. I only really know of salmon, Christopher, by the way, salmon during salmon runs. It is cheap, but it's really only for salmon because how do you monitor a riverine population of Guadalupe Bay stretching over 25 miles? Like
all the way up to the Mississippi.
Yeah, you can't really do it. Insects are usually going to be affected first, amphibians are probably second, but amphibians usually have the opportunity of this
Moving.
water feels funny, I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking, well, the reason why you can't use machine vision to monitor for insects is the fact that insects are usually, how you collect aquatic invertebrates is you go to a riffle, which is a very shallow portion of the river, predominantly white caps, very swift water, and you put a net down, usually a D-frame net, and then you kick those rocks and turn them over because those insects are underneath those rocks in the rock crevices. So you can't do it just a machine population just to look for insects. All you'll do is you'll see a random insect crawl everywhere. So you have to like pull them out, and because a lot of times you can't identify aquatic insects unless you look at it on a microscope, and even then it takes a ton of work. I am very uncomfortable with aquatic insects. I can get to family pretty commonly, but identifying some things down to species is a pain. So
better than I can. I can't do any of the invertebrates. I have like no experience with them.
And by the way, guys, this will be just for your education. I will be putting up this full VOD on YouTube, and I will make a condensed sort of highlight portion as well, if in case you miss anything and you want.
Cool. Do you work with any other organizations besides just the one that you are specifically with?
Yes, 100%. And that's going to be something that's going to really, really become prevalent. State agencies are going to start doing it more and more, but your intrastate agents are going to do it much, much more often. It's very prevalent. So we work with numerous neighboring state agencies on the surface water side. Groundwater side operates at a sort of state level, but we're working with United States Geological Survey on 2 projects. We're working with Fish and Wildlife Service, so I work with a state agency to get fundings, and it's very, very common and often that agencies are actually working together. And one of the things that I've really tried to do is to maintain my contacts with other people on, or with other agencies, people in other agencies. So there's many times I get a call or an email and I assist only in an advisory capacity and vice versa. Um, so it's not even always official collaboration. The world of natural resources is small. You learn people's names, especially when you start getting a sort of niche like I have, looking at management, aquatic resources. That.
Do you know Craig Watson?
Um, do you know where I went to college?
No.
Okay, because there was a Craig Watson that I knew. He plays for the NFL now.
Oh, different Craig Watson, probably.
Yeah. Okay,
Uh,
that would have been a stretch, but
no, Craig Watson's the director down at Tropical Aquaculture Laboratories. He's done,
okay. Yeah,
I don't know how many papers.
yeah, it's insane. Since my papers never really went to aquaculture facilities, but Dave Hohenhaus, Joshua Perkins, Kirk Weinmiller, uh,
Paul Brown?
Paul Brown is a name that I know. I don't know him personally. I know him or I know these others very. Tim Bonner is another one. Gene Wilder,
I've heard of Gene.
yeah, and that's not including all the agents. Those were
Yeah, it's just,
literally all like
yeah.
university and yeah, it's a small world. You see names um like Penguin just said. Oh, I've heard of Wilder. Wilder worked at Texas Tech University and wrote numerous papers, more specifically focusing on the Red River Basin. That so it's you hear these names and you're going to continue hearing them. It's important to maintain. That's one of the best advices I can give any students nowadays is you would be very surprised how many professionals remember your names or what you do. And in the natural resources field, I used to say, this certain thing, that old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that's not quite correct in the natural resources world. And then finally someone else put it this way, and I loved it, and I've been saying it ever since. It's not what you know, it's who knows what you know. So when you put a reference on and these people have heard of you before, they can say, oh yes, he knows this skill, that skill, this skill, he's comfortable at this skill, yada yada. It's not that this person knows me, it's that they know that I am actually proficient and not lying on my resume and just saying I'm proficient at a skill when in fact I did it one time in one class. So that's really stuck with me, going out for volunteering opportunities and making sure that the references you put down know that you know how to do kick seining, that you know how to do plumbing repairs. You're in an aquaculture facility, that's emergency plumbing repairs are going to constantly up. If you don't have plumbing repair experience, it's going to be difficult for you to get for people to want to hire you, because they're going to be like, well, what if you're in a section and a pipe bursts and you have 3 minutes to fix this tank or this entire crop of fish dies? Can you do it? Do you even know what a shut-off valve is? And while they can teach you those things, it's an extra step versus this other person that has the same education but also knows how to fix a PVC pipe.
Practical experience versus theoretical.
Yeah, and there is a huge difference. I've known people that got hired just because the final thing, which was not on the job application, they could go out and they could back up a boat trailer. That was kind of their final test. Some people have gotten hired just from that because no one wants to back the boat trailer up. So if you're the lowest guy on the totem pole, you're going to be backing the boat trailer up. So if you can do that, that makes you like, okay, well, now I don't have to sit there and we don't have to launch it. It doesn't take us 25 minutes to launch a boat. It's in and out. So there is definitely a place in the world for practical experience. I know I personally would 100% rather hire someone with much more practical experience than knowledge. I can teach people. Now let me be very clear. This is in sort of a technician role. I need them to have those skills. I don't need to be out there teaching them how to do a kick seine, how to properly set a dome trap or a hoop trap. I don't need I need to be able to depend on them to be able to properly set those traps. What I can teach them is, okay, if we're doing it in this sort of water in these conditions, what sort of comparisons can we do with the riparian ecologies that are right now? So like those are things that you can teach someone. It's really hard to teach someone to set a hoop trap, and if them not understand it, you're basically, because if you set like a hoop trap or a dome trap wrong, you have the potential to kill the entire net.
It's actually one thing I haven't done. We haven't needed to because most of the work that I've done has either been in ponds or research systems.
Yep.
So, I mean, I haven't done any wild studies, so that's probably why.
Yeah, but if that's not what your experience calls for, I mean, I'm not going to say don't go for that experience. What I'm going to say
No,
is, in your direction that you're heading, it would be much more beneficial for you to know welding, soldering, fixing PVC pipes,
yeah,
being
maintaining
able,
research systems.
yeah, knowing how to work a rivet gun. Those are the practical skills that you direction need versus, me, what direction do you set a hoop net? But that's because it's in a wild setting, or how to work a GPS, that sort of thing. It's all dependent on what you're doing. Now, aquaculture, you're exactly right, is, you can teach someone when fish are going to be spawning, what temperatures they're going to be doing that. It's hard to teach someone to use rivet gun. It is. It's hard to teach someone to use.
Well, and even just the fish example, you can teach someone when when a fish is going to spawn based on like a lunar cycle.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to teach someone how to strip spawn if they've never done it.
Yes. Strip spawning is a skill that definitely takes.
Depends on the fish. Koi are easy.
Koi, trout,
Well,
salmon.
trout are a little harder because they don't have that membrane on their ovaries. To so you basically have to get either like a sounds silly, but like you have to put air pressure on them or in their stomach or in their ovary area to actually get them to release because they don't have that
Hmm.
natural pressure to just push on.
Or you learn.
Yep. I forget the term where the ovaries don't have. I should know it. I just don't remember it.
Yeah.
But it's most of the old world fish, like paddlefish, don't have it. Um,
God, I would not want to strip a paddlefish.
I don't. I don't even think you could. They're too big. Uh, Sturgeon don't have it, and sturgeon are usually one and dones anyway. You can surgically remove from sturgeon, but they don't do very well for a while.
Most of the
After.
time, they're just die from that invasive
Yeah.
surgery. But just so chat is aware, paddlefish and sturgeon is how people get caviar. Caviar is processed fish eggs, or I don't know. But so sturgeon, specifically the beluga sturgeon, is where most of your high-end caviar comes from. Then other people say stuff comes from a beluga sturgeon, and it's not. It's like the Atlantic sturgeon. White sturgeon, probably the other most common one. Paddlefish,
Also,
if you get caught doing a paddlefish row, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
sturgeon, same way. Because I think both of them are on the endangered species list right now.
Yep, all of them are.
All three, yeah.
But beluga sturgeon being such a Russian influence, and Russia not, they say they're protecting, but they're not. We're gonna say they're protecting, and I'm gonna put that in quotation.
Air quotes.
Yeah. Because it is such a, you have no
There is
idea the illegal
in Florida, there's a sturgeon farm. I don't know the species that they raise specifically, but they do raise them for meat and caviar, which is interesting.
It's got to be. I would imagine it'd have to be. I'm not comfortable. I'm just saying that Atlanta was gross. I mean, you don't know it's gross unless you've had it before. I've had roe.
Anastasia is what they raise.
And it's okay. I've had roe, which is salmon eggs, and it's not near as bad as you think. You know, bro, turtles are one of the best tasting things out there. It is.
Yes.
Okay, well, Gentle has had caviar and he says it's great.
I hate it. I've had it once. Never again. Osetra, Siberian, and Sevruga, so none of the ones that are actually on the endangered species list. That's what they raise.
So they pulled it. They've pulled the safety. They've pulled out their safety.
Yeah.
So
Well, because it's illegal as hell to own them in the U.S. because they're on the endangered species list.
Yep.
So,
but does that stop people? I mean,
it does for a fish farm specifically. Usually, not always.
Yeah. But, and that goes into something that probably need to bring up. At what level do you place an aquaculture facility held responsible for their knowledge? So like as a sturgeon, or let's talk about like the fish pond farms like that are doing raising bait fish like largemouth bass, raising diners and that. Some of the Diondas in Texas are now moving threatened. At what level do you hold them to it? What if they have Diondas in their ponds? And even then, at what level do we hold them accountable? Say they accidentally got in a shipment and it wound up being, beluga sturgeon. It is illegal for them to hold them, but since they are not federally protected, or since the facility is not sort of federally backed by houses or by government money, are you going to condemn them an entire year's crop because they got in, their supplier sent them? I mean, the obvious answer is, yeah, they're held responsible and they just have to eat that and pray that they have insurance.
Yeah, but most aquacultures or most aquacultural farms don't have the access to insurance.
Exactly.
Most insurance companies won't fund it.
Exactly. And that goes into the fact that aquaculture being so, I don't want to, it's not new, because aquaculture is probably the
One of the oldest
Yeah, it's
forms of agriculture ever.
one of the oldest agricultural practices in the world. And make no mistake, aquaculture is agriculture. It's just
Yep.
in
It's fish
water.
husbandry instead of
Yes, exactly.
pigs, cows.
So it goes into the simple fact that it's not new, but it's not been accepted, and it's only recently sort of taken off, in part because of the growing world food crisis. Basically, people are like, we cannot physically grow enough right now. We cannot make enough protein with our existing resources. What other questions?
Yeah, my last one kind of ties into that is do you think that aquaculture has a future going the way things are?
Okay. Yeah, and I think we brought this up, and so this is going to be my sort of um final thing to end off on this, because you asked me and when you first asked me do this um on how aquaculture can help with the conservation of our marine and freshwater wildlife rather than so um aquaculture is definitely a widespread discipline that can cover so many things. Have to take into account that aquaculture doesn't just mean food production. Aquaculture is very easily, growing for aquarium trade, growing for, like we were talking about, supplemental stocking in farm ponds to private reservoirs where people are trying to grow trophy largemouth bass, trying to grow trophy channel cat. Then you have the aquaculture facilities that are going for food production. So, in terms of conservation of marine and freshwater wildlife, you have to take that into account, in that fresh marine fish, you have the on land aquaculture facilities are actually very efficient. However, trying to do aquaculture facilities of the giant nets in the open ocean are usually incredibly inefficient, because, like, take the giant salmon net farms over in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, they leave these open, these nets. The salmon cannot get out. That's in the they it's small. It's large enough that smaller fish can swim through the nets and go through there. However, they still have to be supplemental fed. And the thing is they are supplementing feeding these with sardines, which is causing a crash. So, and because of the conversion factor, it would make much more sense to eat those sardines, because when a animal eats another animal, only, I think the normal conversion rate is, it's higher in fish. I want to say it's 30% of the energy taken from food is converted in. So 30%, so 3/10 of a pound of sardines. So, okay, let me phrase that. 30 pounds of sardines is what it would take to grow like 3 pounds of salmon. Or, no, 1 pound to think is how. Basically, the math is like 30% of that energy is actually. I think that's the conversion rate. Don't quote me on that.
It's higher than that for fish specifically, but it depends on the kind of proteins they're
Right.
getting.
So, versus, regular cattle production, which is
Like
much
9 to
lower.
1.
Yes, it's a 9 to 1. It's a very bad thing. But because of those marine facilities being fed that sardine, it's very inefficient in terms of just sheer production protein. However, people don't want to eat sardines, they want to eat salmon. So, growing that is very different in terms of marine. Now, I'm 100% for aquaculture facilities for aquarium production, aquarium feed. So, that's 100%. In terms of conservation, that's probably one of your biggest issues right now. Overfishing, that's a complete other issue. And yes, we're gonna get. I'll talk about that as well, Jake the Cake. But overfishing is not, that solves a minor problem. No, let me rephrase that. Overfishing is by far the most large problem. However, you cannot make enough aquaculture facilities to take out the commercial fishing op. You just physically cannot make that. So overfishing, you're hoping that the aquaculture facilities for food can supplement that to reduce overfishing. That's why you should try and buy your produce, your fish, from sustainably harvested sources. In terms of freshwater resources, aquaculture facilities is going to be critically important going on, strictly because with decreasing land availability and freshwater availability are going to be the two largest issues coming up within the next 30 years. Specifically freshwater. Land availability, urban sprawl is becoming a much more thing. America has a really bad habit of growing out instead of growing up, because we have had that option. So growing out instead of growing up. And then there's just too many straws trying to drink the same amount of water. So right now we have to figure out how to kind of make our water go to use. And the worst thing about it is, in the future, and politicians have tried to do this before and it's been a dismal failure, is you cannot do positional bargaining with natural resources. And what I mean by positional bargaining is, say a potato farmer, a cattle farmer, and a fish farmer, an aquaculture facility. They all need X amount of water. They need this. There is not enough water for all three of them to operate. So what a politician does is he says, okay, well then you're going to get X minus this, you're going to get X minus this, and you're going to get X minus this. And we're just going to kind of split it out evenly between all three of y'all, and it's going to be fair. However, that causes an entire crash of the food system because no one got enough water to create the resources. So now everyone lost. But the politician, trying to make everyone happy, made it to where what he thought was fair. Rather than just saying, no, you get this amount of water to produce your thing. It sucks, but the other two, we got to help you out another way. And those sorts of issues are going to be coming up more and more as water availability drastically decreases. So in terms of marine, I would say aquaculture is much more heavily focused on your sort of fish populations, the fish species themselves. Whereas I believe the freshwater aquacultures is going to be much more about your water availability and land availability and protein availability, since these farm and ranches are going under due to inability. I believe it is the Klamath River Basin, Jake. I can't remember that, but what happened is there was a commercial fishery for one of the suckermouth catfish. Not a suckermouth fish, one of the catastomatids, penguin, your knowledge. But I believe it was a Klamath, so there was a commercial fishery for this sucker. And there's also a potato farm. And for those of you who don't know, potatoes they use a lot of water. They actually do. And so what happened is the politicians got involved. The commercial fishery said, it was a period of severe drought. The commercial fishery said, we need this much water to be able to maintain a commercial fishery and it not crash the population. Potato farmers said, we need this much water. The politicians got involved. I believe that is a Klamath Water Wars, but potato farmers said, we need this. What happened is politicians said, okay, well, we're going to do this. And the entire river and farming system completely crashed and everybody lost.
White suckers, I believe. That's what they were.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So that's one of the best examples of that. But you also have to remember, I mean, I believe the U.S. has been sued by Mexico. I think we're going on like our 12th year. of being sued by Mexico because of water rights. U.S. has a water right with Mexico saying we are going to release X amount of water into the Rio Grande for the availability of Mexico. And when it got really bad during the 2011 drought, which was the largest nationwide drought on record, Klamath was different. I can't remember. There was something. Klamath Water Wars is another sort of example, but I can't remember exactly what was going on. It was, I think, Penguin was right. It was like sucker. But during the 2011, 2012, 2013 drought, which, like I said, one of the most, it was the worst nationwide drought of all time in the history of record. Mexico was suing the United States for not giving us enough water. United States was suing Texas. Texas was suing New Mexico. New Mexico was suing Colorado, and Colorado was saying, "What do you want us to do?" The issue was there was literally not enough water going from there was literally not enough water for them to physically release from Colorado down to New Mexico and down into Texas. The water level was so low that it was below their outlet valve. Yes and no, Jake. There is overfishing, and it has a lot to do with the world population levels. However, when you have, this is going to be the absolute last thing. My wife is. So, does anybody in chat know who owns the world's largest stockpile of bluefin tuna? Penguin?
I actually don't know this one.
Me? Well, you wish. It's actually Mitsubishi, the vehicle company from Japan. Whichever one. They have the largest stockpile of bluefin tuna flash frozen in the world. And they have one of the largest fishing fleets in the world. And they do it illegally. What they do is they create a new fishing boat and say, we're going to use this and decommission one of our old boats, but they allow the old boat to continue operation. And bluefin tuna is one of the and here's something that's really goes back to one of the first questions Penguin said, about terrestrial versus aquatic. Bluefin tuna is still one of the most heavily sought after things. That and proper Chilean sea bass. I'm not talking about the fake Chilean sea bass that a lot of people think. Bluefin tuna and Chilean sea bass are technically, if you look at population levels, they are more endangered than the white rhino. And remember, the northern white rhino just went extinct. And yet people are actively looking for their bluefin tuna and Chilean sea bass to put it on their plate. So, no, Christopher, and that's the thing and that goes back into the positional bargaining. It was incredibly thing. That's why I encourage everyone to go watch the end of the line. I believe what it was the Tuna Alliance, whatever, the World Organization for Fishing, the one who sets international standards, said they got a bunch of scientists and they said, scientists, figure out what we need to do to make bluefin tuna come back. Scientists got together and said, okay, if we harvest 90,000 tons of bluefin tuna, the populations will not get worse. They won't get better, they won't get worse. If we want to recover them, we need to harvest 30,000 tons. What happened is the World Organization, the politicians said, well, we can't do that, so let's set our level at 120,000 tons. And then when you look at the actual numbers, we're harvesting close to 360,000 tons a year of bluefin tuna, an animal that proportionally is more endangered than the northern white.
Takes about 20 years to mature too.
Right.
So, that's cool.
Yeah. So what do we do, Jake? Well, aquaculture is a good way for freshwater. In terms of a marine saltwater, it's the absolute best thing, and this has been widely accepted by everyone in the world, all the civilized nations that want to follow rules and actually get it, is to set up marine preserves. It would actually take much less much less portion than people think to make a marine preserve that would actually cause the oceans to come back relatively strongly. The issue is international waters is awful because who's going to enforce the law? And well, you're going to say a coalition of countries. Look at the European Union. Look at the the United Nations. It's literally just a bunch of old men bickering at each other. You're going to try and make them to cooperate on something that's this important, but this important, but not as important as like nuclear arms. They can't even decide about what nuclear arms is. They can't even decide what a nuclear warhead is actually classified as. Can you not keep that will kill most marine fish. Keeping them enclosed will kill them. That's all right, Christopher.
Jake, that's part of what aquaculture wants to do for the conservation part of the ornamental species.
Right.
But it's easier to do for an ornamental species because in general, not for all, they're much smaller. It's a lot easier to keep a fish that's, at most a foot or two long versus 5 or 6 feet. So,
well, you say it works for salmon, but those are not. The salmon that are in farms are not living, and they're also not the salmon that are in trouble. That's important. Your aquaculture facilities, they're not going to raise the rare things for production. The salmon that they're being produced, a lot of times that's your Atlantic salmon or your very popular like Pacific salmon. Yep. But what about the coho salmon or the cutthroat trout? These things are not cutthroat. But your rare salmons and trouts that belong to one river. You can't.
In that case, they've been trying to make the rivers become natural preserves because they're U.S. based usually.
Right, and that's definitely true. And in fact, one of the best proponents for native trout and management for conservation efforts is actually the Native American tribes.
Yep.
But all right, well, if you have any other questions for me, Penguin?
Nope, that was pretty much my last.
All right. Thank you so much for this, Penguin. This was actually incredible. We should definitely do this again. This was a lot of fun. This was much more enjoyable. Maybe we pick another topic and just debate back and forth about it. Like I said, chat, I will put this entire raw video up onto the YouTube. And then I will make a sort of condensed highlighted portion for that. But otherwise, thank you guys so much again. Don't forget Fish Friday tomorrow, so there will be another fish video up by the end of the day. Does this mean I'm going to fish less in raft? Absolutely not, because literally one of the things I catch the most of in raft, you can catch like 5 things. You can catch a mackerel, a tilapia, a catfish, a salmon.
They don't have anything fun in that game.
They have a blue tang.
That's not fun. Blue tang are only interesting because they have armored scales.
Yeah, they're honestly, I think a lot of reef.
They look cool, and that's about it.
Yeah. Well, it's like they either look cool and they're very boring, or they're very cool about their ecologically thing, and you literally cannot keep it. Die.
Discus.
Were you talking about aquarium or saltwater, not freshwater?
Yeah, but they fall into the same fucking category, and you know it.
Basically.
They are absolutely gorgeous. If you look at them, they will die.
got so many caught off in Norway. I would love to be. But like I said, thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again. Penguin, this was a blast. Like I said, let's do this again. Just
For sure. It's definitely
Figure it
interesting for me to see the other side of it too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm mostly our aquaculture and the fisheries thing rather than the actual water part of it.
definitely. But all right, everyone, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and
Have
peace.
a good night.